Okay, so we're both going to present. I guess I'm going to start, and then Xiao Yue, I'll hand it over to Xiao Yue. So I guess if you can move me to the first slide, Xiao Yue. Okay, so architectural design and city design, it impacts political decisions and it has implications on the community. And the facet that we look at primarily in this presentation is how physical settings can selectively filter people according to their embodied situation, which can include gender, which is, of course, our focus today. So J.J. Gibson is pretty central to our views. He is classic in embodied thinking. His work is grounded in pragmatism and phenomenology. He holds that we perceive in terms of the ease or difficulty with which our bodies can realize actions in the environment. His wife, Eleanor Gibson, is also a key figure in ecological psychology. A core, like an obvious example, is that a river is a barrier to us, but it's walkable to a creature like the lizard on this screen. But the thing we would also note is that symbolic barriers can have exactly the same effect as physical barriers. So here we have a space where you have, say, a decorative curb and a lawn and a run of stairs. And these things, they don't physically prevent entry, but they psychologically repel people. And another thing is that when people are sad, tired, sick, indebted, hungry, carrying large bags, this has been shown many, many times that people will see stairs as being steeper or further away. And the key point we want to emphasize is that these perceptual differences are not merely subjective. They're basically judgments that a space will be harder to traverse, because if you're sad, tired, in debt, these are energy depleting conditions. These are embodied conditions, in other words. And so on these grounds, we've proposed in other work that symbolic features such as those we just described in the last slide can differentially repel segments of the population. So for example, we've shown this in the case of homeless populations and the Egyptians, people in Egypt, who we've shown are pushed out of certain spaces more than non-homeless people and tourists. And we would add that homeless people, when they're pushed out of these spaces, they're actually objectively less welcomed, and likewise for Egyptians. And so again, these are not merely subjective things in people's head. These are actually objective things that are going on in space. So the key point is that selective permeability is not subjective or just in your head. So for example, a woman might see a setting as less welcoming and stay out of it because it may pose more objective risk to her than it does to men, or it may just make things objectively more difficult to her than it does to men. So studies show that bodily differences between men and women translate to different perceptual judgments about space, and this includes design spaces. And even after you control for factors like height, these perceptual differences still show up. And this raises questions about how socialization perhaps generates different bodily comportment, hence different perception, and hence settings being differentially accessible to men and women, and perhaps also other gender identities. So an example, this is a pretty clear-cut example, but and kind of leaving even perception behind, but recent subway token systems in places like Toronto that were in place as late as 2019 work quite well if you're somebody who's going to work and coming home. Once a day you go to work and you come home. But if you're somebody juggling multiple things, like saying going to a part-time job and then going to get groceries and then going to pick up your kids from daycare, it works much less well. And of course, in a world where everybody is treated equally, we would expect this to be an equal issue with men, women, and other genders. But of course, we all know that we don't live in this world. And we all know that men more often are going to work and coming back, whereas women are bearing the brunt of burdens of having to do these other things. And so even something as simple as a token system basically makes space selectively more closed to women.
Our conclusions are mostly drawn from the observations from our focus group. We had a pretty diverse international population, which covers countries including South Korea, China, Thailand, US, Germany, France, Spain, Kazakhstan, Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, Morocco, Egypt, and Russia. So the primary conclusion we draw from our observation is that men are reported to be the most threatening element in settings that women find most hostile in urban space, which study the data shows that the high risk of sexual harassment towards young women is commonly found in major cities across the world. So this pattern has a self-reinforcing mechanism. Spaces dominated by men, for example, some streets, buses, and gyms are where most problems occur. Consequently, women can be uncomfortable in such places. And this effect is self-amplifying because women would turn to avoid such places they find threatening, which are those that have less women, so that by removing themselves from those spaces, it gets worse. One of the settings most participants find hostile is public transportation. Certain design features make settings more uncomfortable for them and objectively dangerous. For example, such kind of tight face-to-face seating and similar arrangements on some European and North American subways creates chances for sexual touching that may seem accidental. And this generates a situation of disempowerment, especially within the cultures of politeness in which many women are raised. In this context, one participant reported that her solution is just ignoring somebody who was sexually touching her on a subway. In the case of North Africa, participants from Morocco reported that sexual harassment happens on a daily basis, which statistic has also shown that 55% of women reported it on public buses. And crowded microbuses with majority male readership in Egypt make it a heaven for perpetrators targeting women. In this North African situations, lack of women make buses more dangerous. Women therefore avoid them, making them even more dangerous. Consequently, the cycle feeds on itself. Out of this extremities, some experiment with pink buses has occurred. In terms of driving, participants who live in countries where private cars are the primary transport, they reported places like parking lots and gas stations are the most hostile to them. Insufficient lighting and lack of people can increase the harm. An empty supermarket parking lot at 2 a.m. can be more dangerous than a neighborhood pub at the same time, as Jane Jacobs observed many years ago. So our observations lead to the conclusion that gendered transportation contributes to women's limited mobility in urban space. As other scholars also agreed on that lack of family support, inadequate public transit systems, reductions in state welfare payment, etc., contribute to the constraints on these women's activity spaces, restricting them to the confines of their neighborhood. Most importantly, the race and class outcomes of this are manifest in that it is low income single women with color. Some participants suggested that emergency bottoms can be a solution because they will feel safer when they know they can call for help when it's needed. However, some participants also reported the extent of the panic bottom itself can make the space look unsafe. So panic bottoms may be counterproductive because places designed with distrust get what they're looking for. As White said, the idea is that if you make a place look dangerous, it becomes dangerous because you drive out people and thus the safety that comes with having eyes on the street. However, buttons for general emergencies, for example, for medical purpose, or phone apps for emergency calls may be helpful.
Okay, and some other things that we looked at, the study we did that we were talking about in this case was from the previous year. Then in the more recent year, we actually looked at education, where we also kind of got some gendered results. And one interesting thing, we had some engineering students who again feel kind of unwelcomed within male-dominated classrooms. And there's some interesting results. They're not ours, but on mathematics. And it turns out that, I mean, the stereotype is that women aren't as good at mathematics, but actually you get equal performance and you get actually women exceeding men in certain jurisdictions. And so the issue really doesn't seem to be with curriculum. It seems to be with style of instruction. And in fact, it turns out, and can you switch to the next slide, please? It turns out that that women sometimes just have different styles of learning. This could be through socialization or biology. We don't really have to adjudicate this here, but according to some of these studies, women kind of want to have deeper understandings of things. So the stereotype would be like women want to understand people, fine, but women also actually want to understand the deeper understandings, have a deeper understanding of the bases of mathematics, which is actually a good thing if you want to be a good mathematician. So when I took my mathematics, it was just basically about mathematical answering proficiency. Nobody ever actually explained to me that the Pythagorean theorem is literally the area of one square plus the area of another square equals the area of the bigger square. And that would have been a really useful thing for me to know. But evidently, when you use these approaches with women, a lot of times their performance will actually exceed that of men. And this is something really everybody should be learning anyways. So by teaching in these kind of technocratic ways, we unnecessarily exclude certain segments of the population from an area of study that's important. And it hurts us all because we could all benefit in terms of human flourishing, the more people we have educated in various areas. Okay, so rather than a standard conclusion, we just like to sum up by highlighting some of what we think are modest strengths of the approach that we're using. So our approach, to begin with, it acknowledges radical differences in individual experiences. So we experience differently to the extent that we're embodied differently. So this can be because of gender, cultural habits that we carry with us, individual histories, disability, and many, many other reasons. Our approach also avoids solipsism for a couple of reasons. So first, differences in experiences are grounded in non-subjective embodied differences, which bring about different opportunities and constraints in the world. But second, in spite of the differences that we have as human beings, I mean, we're significantly embodied similarly. And for this reason, we actually share quite a bit of commonality in our experiences. So Xiaoyue and I have quite different differences in age, cultural upbringing, gender identity, etc. But we mostly understand one another and we're mostly embodied similarly. So we just want to point out that broadly speaking, there is common ground for communication, and our approach emphasizes this too. And the approach we use is broadly applicable. So far we've used it to address issues like political situations in Egypt, exclusion of the homeless in Michigan, selective receptivity to messaging in populist contexts, for example, with conspiracy theories, differential access in educational settings, and of course, gendered settings. So generally, and while acknowledging that we're only contending with a razor thin slice of the issues, we found this approach useful for negotiating a pluralistic and dynamic world. And thank you very much. We really appreciate being here.